"You don't need to worry about him," she said, and the way she said it made it clear that I absolutely should. We were standing in my kitchen, the overhead light too bright for the tension in the room, her arms folded tightly across her chest, while my phone buzzed again on the counter between us. Daniel. Always Daniel. The name had started to feel like a third person in our relationship, someone I had never met, but was somehow competing with anyway. I tried to keep my voice steady when I asked why he needed her so often, why midnight texts were normal now, why every late meeting seemed to involve the same guy. She exhaled sharply, like I was disappointing her. "He's just my colleague," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear in that controlled way she had when she was trying not to snap. "You don't need to worry about him. There's nothing there." Nothing there. I wanted to believe that, but I had seen the way her phone lit up and how her expression softened before she remembered I was watching. I had seen how she angled the screen away just slightly. It wasn't dramatic enough to accuse, but it was enough to feel. "If you trust me," she continued, stepping closer, her voice lowering into something almost intimate, "then don't question every friendship I have." That word trust always hit like a challenge. I loved her, and loving her meant I didn't want to be the insecure boyfriend counting text notifications like they were crimes. So I nodded, even though my jaw felt tight. I told her I trusted her. I told her I just needed reassurance sometimes. She relaxed instantly, as if the argument had been a test I had barely passed. Later that night we were in bed, and the argument had dissolved into touch the way it always did. She pressed herself against me, her fingers sliding under my shirt, nails grazing my skin just enough to pull a reaction out of me. The physical connection between us had always been intense, almost unfairly good, like our bodies communicated better than we did. When she kissed me, slow and deliberate, it blurred the edges of my doubts. I hated how easily desire could override suspicion. Her phone lit up on the nightstand. She didn't reach for it immediately, which somehow made it worse. When she finally picked it up, she smiled faintly at the screen. "Maya's really active tonight," she said casually. That caught me off guard. Maya was my best friend since college, the one person who had seen me through breakups, job changes, family disasters. The idea of her being active on my girlfriend's phone twisted something in my stomach. "Oh yeah?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "She's been liking my posts a lot," she continued, scrolling. "Commenting too. I didn't realize she paid that much attention to me." I tried to laugh it off. Maya commented on everything. That was who she was. But then she rolled onto her side and looked at me in a way that felt almost calculated. "I'm not the jealous type," she said softly. "I trust you. So I don't need to worry about her, right?" The symmetry of it was so clean it almost impressed me. I had questioned Daniel. Now she was questioning Maya. The scoreboard was even. If I pushed, I would look like a hypocrite. "Of course not," I replied, forcing a small smile. "She's just my friend." She studied my face for a second, searching for something. Guilt, maybe. Then she leaned in and kissed me again, deeper this time, like sealing a pact. Her hand slid down my chest slowly, deliberately, and I let myself get lost in it because it was easier than arguing, easier than dissecting every glance and notification. But something shifted that night. Over the next week, I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way she would tilt her phone away when Daniel's name appeared. The way she would say she was exhausted from work, but still somehow have energy to reply instantly when he messaged. The way Maya, when the three of us were together, seemed slightly guarded around her, like there was a private current running underneath the surface. One evening at Maya's apartment, I walked into the living room, and the conversation between them stopped too quickly. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just an abrupt silence that felt rehearsed. "What were you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep it light. "Just something stupid," my girlfriend answered quickly. "Yeah, nothing important," Maya added, but she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. The air felt thick. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I was projecting my own insecurity onto normal interactions. Still, I started paying attention. I noticed how often Daniel came up in casual conversation, almost as if she wanted me to normalize his presence. I noticed how she'd casually mention that he thought she was brilliant at work, or that he said she deserved a promotion. It wasn't flirtatious on the surface, but it planted images in my head anyway. I hated that I could picture another man seeing her the way I did. At the same time, she'd bring up Maya in these subtle ways. "She's funny," she'd say. "We've been talking more lately." The way she said it felt loaded, like she was watching my reaction. I started to feel like I was constantly being measured. One night, as we lay tangled together after another argument that had dissolved into heat instead of resolution, she rested her head against my chest and traced slow patterns across my skin. "You know," she murmured, "it's really attractive when you're not jealous." That comment stayed with me long after she fell asleep. It wasn't reassurance, it was conditioning. She had promised I didn't need to worry about him. I had promised I didn't need to worry about her. On the surface, it sounded balanced, mature, even healthy. But lying awake in the dark, listening to her steady breathing, I realized something that made my chest feel tight. We weren't reassuring each other. We were daring each other to look closer. And for the first time, instead of feeling embarrassed for questioning things, I felt alert. Something wasn't adding up, and whatever game was being played between Daniel, Maya, and the woman lying next to me, I had the uneasy feeling that I was the only one still playing it honestly. The first time I saw her physically turn her phone away from me, it was so subtle I almost convinced myself it hadn't happened. But once you notice something like that, you never unsee it. We were sitting on the couch, her legs draped over mine, the television playing something neither of us was actually watching, and her screen lit up with Daniel's name again. She didn't jump or panic. She just shifted her wrist slightly, angling the display toward her own body as she read the message, her lips pressing together for half a second before she typed a reply. I felt ridiculous for noticing the angle of her wrist, but I noticed everything after that. She used to leave her phone face up on the table when she went to shower, and now it disappeared with her into the bathroom. She used to complain about how much Daniel talked about spreadsheets and office politics, and now she quoted his jokes like they were charming. When I asked casually what was so funny one night, she smiled and said, "You wouldn't get it. It's just work stuff." And something about the way she said it made it clear I was outside of a circle I didn't know existed. At the same time, Maya started acting different too, and that part hurt in a quieter way. She and I had always had this easy rhythm, the kind where silence wasn't awkward and teasing never felt sharp. But lately there was a stiffness when my girlfriend was around. If I said something sarcastic, Maya would glance at her before laughing, as if checking whether it was safe. If my girlfriend reached across me to grab something, Maya's eyes would flicker toward the contact, then away again too quickly. One Friday night, the three of us ended up at Maya's apartment with takeout and cheap wine, trying to recreate the comfort of our old routines. My girlfriend was curled up in the armchair, barefoot, looking effortlessly beautiful in an oversized sweater that slipped off one shoulder just enough to make it distracting. I caught myself watching her, remembering how that sweater had ended up on my bedroom floor the week before, how she had pulled me down onto the bed with that same half-smile she used when she knew she had control of the room. Maya was sitting across from her, laughing at something on her phone. "Daniel sent me the funniest story about their boss," my girlfriend said suddenly, glancing up. "He said I should tell you guys." The fact that Daniel's name entered our space so easily irritated me more than it should have. I forced a grin and asked what the story was, but before she could answer, her phone buzzed again. She checked it immediately this time, and I watched the way her expression softened, the way her thumb lingered over the screen before she typed back. Later that night, I got up to grab another bottle of wine from the kitchen, and when I came back into the living room, the air felt different. They were sitting closer now, heads tilted toward each other, speaking in low voices that stopped the second my footsteps crossed the threshold. The silence wasn't dramatic, but it was precise, like a curtain dropping. "What were you two whispering about?" I asked, keeping my tone playful even though my chest felt tight. "Just something stupid," she replied quickly, leaning back into the chair. "Yeah, Nothing important, Maya added, and she tucked her hair behind her ear the way she did when she was uncomfortable. It felt rehearsed, like they had agreed on the wording without realizing how synchronized they sounded. I stood there for a second longer than necessary, studying both of them, and I could almost see the calculation in my girlfriend's eyes, as if she were measuring how much I had picked up on. On the drive home, I tried to bring it up gently. I told her it felt strange walking into a room and having conversation stop. She sighed heavily, staring out the passenger window. "You're reading into things again," she said. "We were literally talking about a meme. Not everything is a conspiracy." The word conspiracy stung, because it made my discomfort sound irrational. I reached over and rested my hand on her thigh, partly to reconnect, partly to remind myself that we were still us. She covered my hand with hers and squeezed, and for a moment the tension eased. When we got home, she pulled me into the bedroom with a kind of urgency that felt less romantic and more strategic, kissing me deeply, pushing me back onto the mattress as if proving something. Her body against mine was familiar and intoxicating, her breath warm against my neck as she whispered that I worried too much, that I needed to relax, that she was here with me, wasn't she? I let myself get lost in the heat of it, in the way her fingers curled into my shirt, in the way she moved like she had nothing to hide. But even as I held her, even as our breathing slowed and the room settled into darkness, the small cracks kept widening in my mind. Daniel's constant presence, Maya's careful silences, the way my girlfriend seemed to anticipate my doubts and redirect them before I could fully voice them. I started watching more closely after that, not confronting, not accusing, just observing. I paid attention to timestamps, to patterns, to the way she smiled at her phone before setting it face down. I hated feeling like this, like some paranoid detective in my own relationship, but something inside me refused to quiet down. She had promised I didn't need to worry about him, and I had told her she didn't need to worry about Maya, but the balance felt artificial now, like a scale that had been tampered with. The more I tried to ignore it, the clearer it became that something was being staged around me, and I was the only one who hadn't been given the script. The moment everything shifted wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a screaming match or some cinematic discovery. It was a stupid Tuesday night when I borrowed her laptop to order food because my phone was dying, and a single notification destroyed whatever illusion I was still clinging to. She was in the shower, steam curling under the bathroom door, and I was sitting at the kitchen table scrolling through a delivery app when a message preview slid across the top of her screen. It wasn't from Daniel. It was from Maya, and it said, "I can't keep lying to him. This is getting cruel." For a second, I genuinely couldn't breathe, like my body had forgotten how. My first instinct was to slam the laptop shut and pretend I hadn't seen it, to protect myself from what I already knew it meant. But instead, my fingers moved before my brain caught up. I clicked. The conversation opened like a wound. Months of messages, private jokes, late-night exchanges that overlapped perfectly with the times she had claimed she was exhausted. Compliments that felt intimate. He doesn't notice. He trusts us. Just a little longer. The words blurred together, but the implication was clear enough to make my stomach drop. I scrolled further up, my heartbeat thudding in my ears so loudly it felt physical. There were plans to meet for coffee that I never knew about, references to moments that must have happened right in front of me. A message from my girlfriend that read, "He's starting to suspect Daniel instead, which actually helps," followed by a laughing emoji that made my chest burn. Daniel, the decoy, the distraction. My hands were shaking so badly I had to steady the laptop with my other palm. I felt stupid, exposed, humiliated. All those arguments, all those reassurances, all those nights when she told me I was overthinking things. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was the choreography of it, the way they had apparently used my trust as part of their strategy. Then I saw a message from her that made me freeze. "Just stick to the plan. He has to be the one to end it." The plan. What plan required me to break up with her? Why would they need that? I read that line 3 times, my mind trying to fit it into a narrative that made sense. If they were together, why not just leave? Why manipulate me into ending things? Why the elaborate misdirection with Daniel? The bathroom door opened and I snapped the laptop shut so fast it almost slipped off the table. She walked out wrapped in a towel, hair damp, cheeks flushed from the heat. She looked beautiful, effortless, unaware that I had just seen something that shattered the version of her I thought I knew. "You ordered yet?" she asked, crossing the room toward me. "Still deciding," I replied, forcing my voice to sound normal even though my pulse hadn't slowed down. She leaned over my shoulder, her skin still warm from the shower, and kissed the side of my neck absent-mindedly. That small, affectionate gesture almost broke me. I wanted to turn around and confront her right then, to shove the screen in her face and demand an explanation, to watch her scramble. Instead, I stayed still. Because something about that message didn't sit right. If she and Maya were having an affair, why would Maya say she couldn't keep lying to me? Why would my girlfriend respond with instructions instead of affection? The tone shifted strangely in certain parts of the thread, almost clinical, like two people coordinating something rather than falling into it. I waited until she went into the bedroom to get dressed, then I opened the laptop again. I scrolled slowly this time, paying attention to details instead of reacting to emotions. The timestamps, the phrasing, the rhythm of replies. Some messages from Maya sounded exactly like her, full of sarcasm and shorthand. Others felt off, more formal, almost stiff. Then I noticed something that made my confusion deepen. Several of the messages sent from Maya's account were time-stamped during moments when Maya had been physically with me. I remembered those evenings clearly, because we had been watching a game together, or grabbing drinks after work. There was no way she could have been sending paragraphs back and forth at the same time, unless she had been texting under the table, or unless something else was happening. I felt anger, yes, but beneath it there was something colder forming. A realization that this might not be as simple as my girlfriend cheating with my best friend. The plan line kept echoing in my head, and the mention of Daniel as a helpful distraction felt too deliberate to ignore. For the first time since this all started, I didn't feel purely hurt. I felt alert. I closed the laptop gently this time and leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling as my mind recalibrated. When she walked back into the room, dressed and smiling, asking what I wanted on the pizza, I looked at her differently. Not with accusation, not with heartbreak, with strategy. Because if there was a plan unfolding around me, I needed to understand it before I made my move. And for the first time since Daniel's name had started haunting our relationship, I stopped feeling like the insecure boyfriend. I started feeling like the only person in the room who hadn't been told the rules. I didn't confront her the next morning, and that decision surprised even me, because every instinct I had was screaming to drag the truth into the light and force her to explain it. Instead, I kissed her goodbye before work, told her I'd see her later, and watched her walk down the hallway like nothing between us had shifted, like I hadn't read months of messages that turned my relationship into something staged. That entire day, I played it cool. I sent her a casual text around noon asking how work was going, and when she replied with a complaint about Daniel overloading her with tasks, I almost laughed at the audacity of it. The same Daniel she swore was harmless. The same Daniel who apparently served as a convenient distraction. I responded with a supportive message, told her she deserved better teammates, and she sent back a heart emoji like we were perfectly aligned. That night, when she came over, I was ready. Not to accuse, to observe. We ordered dinner, sat close on the couch, and I made sure to lean into her the way I always did, letting my hand rest on her thigh while we talked. She seemed relaxed, almost affectionate in a heightened way, like she was trying to reinforce the illusion of intimacy. When her phone buzzed, she glanced down and smiled faintly before silencing it. "Daniel again?" I asked lightly. She rolled her eyes. "He seriously has no boundaries. I swear he thinks I'm his personal therapist." I watched her carefully as she said it. No hesitation, no guilt. Just smooth delivery. If she was lying, she was good at it. Later, when she went to shower, I didn't check her phone again. That would have been reckless. Instead, I waited until she fell asleep, her breathing slow and steady beside me, and I carefully slid out of bed with her laptop. I wasn't just scrolling this time. I was analyzing. I opened the message thread with Maya again and paid attention to details I had ignored before. The way certain sentences were structured, the punctuation. Maya always used lowercase casually, rarely bothered with perfect grammar, and had a habit of ending serious statements with a sarcastic emoji to soften them. But some of the messages from her account were grammatically flawless, almost stiff. I checked the account security settings. That's when things started to get strange. There were login records attached to Maya's profile that showed unfamiliar devices. Some of them traced back to the same general location as my girlfriend's apartment. I stared at the timestamps, cross-referencing them with evenings I clearly remembered being with Maya in person. It didn't add up, unless Maya had been logging in from multiple devices at the same time, or unless someone else had access. My pulse slowed instead of racing. The anger was still there, but it was sharpening into something colder, more precise. I opened her email and searched for Daniel's company, looking for anything official that confirmed he existed beyond stories and text messages. Nothing. No corporate email threads, no HR notices, no internal memos mentioning him, just vague references in casual chats. I opened a browser and searched the company website myself. I scrolled through the employee directory. No Daniel. I checked LinkedIn. The profile existed, but it was thin, almost empty, with a profile picture that looked too polished. I ran the image through a reverse search tool. It was a stock photo. My stomach dropped, but not in the way it had before. This wasn't heartbreak. This was realization. Daniel didn't exist, at least not in the way she had described. The late meetings, the work trips, the emotional intimacy I had been jealous of, all of it rested on a person who might not even be real. I leaned back in the chair and tried to piece it together. If Daniel was fake, then who had she been texting at midnight? Who was she stepping outside to call? And why create a fictional coworker at all? Then my mind circled back to Maya. If the affair messages were partially inconsistent, and if Daniel was potentially fabricated, then the narrative I had been reacting to might have been constructed deliberately. But for what? When I slid back into bed, she shifted toward me instinctively, wrapping her arm around my chest. "You're cold," she murmured sleepily, pressing her body against mine. I stared at the ceiling in the dark, feeling the warmth of her skin and the steady rhythm of her breathing. She felt real. The way she fit against me felt real. The chemistry, the tension, the nights we couldn't keep our hands off each other, none of that felt staged. And yet the digital trail told a different story. The next morning, I started acting differently. Not distant, not suspicious, attentive. I complimented her more. I asked about her day with interest. I stopped questioning Daniel entirely. I even joked about being relieved that I didn't have to compete with a coworker anymore. She relaxed in response, visibly, and that confirmed it for me. If Daniel had been real, she would have maintained the narrative. Instead, she seemed almost pleased that I had let it go, like a variable in her equation had stabilized. I wasn't the insecure boyfriend anymore. I was gathering information. Because if Daniel was a decoy, and if the messages with Maya were partially fabricated, then this wasn't a simple betrayal. It was something engineered. And the more I uncovered, the clearer it became that whatever game was being played, it had nothing to do with love triangles. It had to do with control. And I was done being the only one unaware of the rules. The more I studied the messages between her and Maya, the less they felt like a secret affair, and the more they felt like a script with missing pages. At first, I thought I was just trying to soften the blow, inventing inconsistencies so I wouldn't have to accept that my girlfriend and my best friend were betraying me in the most humiliating way possible. But the details refused to line up, and once you start seeing fractures in a story, you cannot unsee them. I began comparing timestamps with almost obsessive precision. One thread showed Maya sending a long, emotional paragraph about how guilty she felt at 9:42 p.m. on a Thursday night. I remembered that Thursday clearly because Maya and I had been at a bar watching a playoff game, sitting shoulder to shoulder, arguing over bad referee calls while her phone stayed face up on the table the entire time. She hadn't been typing out paragraphs. She hadn't even picked up her phone for more than a quick glance. Another message exchange showed Maya responding instantly to something my girlfriend wrote at 7:15 p.m. on a Sunday, yet at that exact time Maya had been in my car, complaining about traffic while I drove us back from her parents' place. There was no way she had been secretly engaged in a deep, strategic conversation without me noticing. That was when the doubt shifted direction. Instead of asking whether they were lying to me together, I started asking whether one of them was lying to both of us. I dug into the account settings more thoroughly. Hidden in the security logs were multiple login sessions from devices that weren't consistent with Maya's usual phone or laptop. One of those devices traced back to an IP address astonishingly close to my girlfriend's apartment. I checked again, convinced I had misread it. I hadn't. My chest tightened, but not from heartbreak this time. It was something colder, something sharper. If my girlfriend had access to Maya's account, that meant the entire affair could be partially constructed. It meant the jealousy over Daniel might have been intentionally redirected. It meant the whispered conversations that stopped when I walked in might not have been conspiratorial, but cautious. I replayed every recent interaction in my head. The way my girlfriend had emphasized how I didn't need to worry about Daniel. The way she had smoothly mirrored that sentiment by asking whether she needed to worry about Maya. The perfect symmetry of it. The balance that felt so mature at the time now felt engineered. I didn't confront her. Instead, I tested something. The next evening, while we were cooking dinner together, I casually mentioned that Maya and I had plans to grab coffee alone the following day. It wasn't true. I just wanted to see her reaction. She froze for a fraction of a second before smiling. "That's nice," she said lightly, chopping vegetables with precise movements. "You two haven't hung out much lately." There it was, that subtle encouragement. No jealousy, no curiosity, almost relief. Later that night, when she fell asleep beside me, I sent Maya a simple message from my phone asking if she could meet me the next day because I needed to talk. She replied within minutes, confused but willing. When we met at a quiet cafe the following afternoon, I didn't accuse her of anything. I just watched her face carefully as I said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, because I've been seeing messages that don't make sense." Her expression shifted from confusion to alarm almost instantly. "What messages?" she asked, and the concern in her voice didn't sound rehearsed. I described a few of the texts without revealing how I had accessed them. The color drained from her face. "I never sent that," she said firmly. "I swear to you, I never wrote anything like that." I studied her eyes, searching for the slightest hint of deception. I didn't find it. When I mentioned the timestamps that overlapped with times we had been physically together, she pulled out her phone and opened her account settings right there at the table. As she scrolled through the login history, her brow furrowed. "I don't recognize these devices," she said quietly. "I only ever log in from my phone and my laptop." The pieces began aligning in a way that was far more unsettling than a simple affair. If my girlfriend had been accessing Maya's account, then she had been manufacturing conversations. If she had fabricated parts of this narrative, then Daniel might not just be a decoy, but a full invention designed to steer my suspicion in a controlled direction. The realization didn't bring relief. It brought something heavier, because if she had gone to that length, it meant this wasn't about attraction or impulsive betrayal. It was deliberate, calculated. As Maya sat across from me, visibly shaken, I felt the ground shift beneath everything I thought I understood. The love, the jealousy, the arguments about trust, the tension in that kitchen when she told me I didn't need to worry about him. It had all been part of a design I hadn't recognized. And in that moment, staring at the evidence of manipulated logins and impossible timestamps, I understood something that made my pulse slow into something dangerously calm. This wasn't a love triangle. It was strategy. And I had just uncovered the first layer. Once I accepted that parts of the affair had been staged, I stopped looking at the situation like a jealous boyfriend and started looking at it like someone being maneuvered. The question shifted from, "Are they together?" to, "Why would she need me to believe they were?" And that question led me somewhere I never expected to go. It started with something small. I logged into my banking app one evening while she was in the kitchen, humming to herself like everything was normal, and I noticed a notification about a recent credit inquiry. I almost ignored it because I hadn't applied for anything, but the curiosity that had been growing inside me for weeks pushed me to click. There was a loan, a substantial one, and my name was attached to it as a co-signer. I stared at the screen, reading it again and again as if repetition would change the words. I had never signed anything. I had never discussed taking out a loan. The lender was legitimate, the paperwork electronic, and the signature attached to my name looked disturbingly close to mine. For a moment, I genuinely wondered if I had forgotten something, if maybe during one of those late nights when we were talking about future plans, I had agreed to something more concrete than I remembered. But the deeper I dug, the clearer it became that the application had been submitted from her laptop. My hands went cold. I opened my email and searched for anything related to the loan. There were confirmation messages routed to a secondary inbox I barely used, one she had once helped me organize when she said my digital life was chaotic. The security settings showed that my recovery email had been modified 2 months earlier. 2 months. Right around when the tension with Maya began. Right around when Daniel's name started dominating our conversations. The pieces clicked into place so fast it almost made me dizzy. If she could isolate me from Maya by manufacturing jealousy, then I wouldn't compare notes. If I believed Maya had betrayed me, I would withdraw from her. If I felt insecure about Daniel, I would focus on defending my place in the relationship instead of scrutinizing paperwork. Isolation first, finances second. That was the real plan. I remembered the message. He has to be the one to end it. If I broke up with her, if I stormed out thinking she had cheated, I would be too angry and too distracted to immediately question financial discrepancies. She could position herself as the victim of my jealousy while quietly securing whatever she needed. I scrolled further through the loan documents and found something that made my jaw tighten. There were references to a joint investment account that had been opened but not fully funded yet. My savings account was listed as a potential source for a transfer pending final authorization. Authorization I had never given. I heard her footsteps behind me and locked my phone just before she leaned over my shoulder, wrapping her arms loosely around my waist. "You look intense," she teased, resting her chin against my back. "What are you plotting?" The irony almost made me laugh. "Just work stuff," I replied calmly, turning in her arms and kissing her lightly so she wouldn't see the calculation in my eyes. She smiled up at me, completely at ease, and for a brief second I tried to reconcile the woman standing in front of me with the digital trail I had just uncovered. She brushed her fingers across my chest absently, her touch warm, familiar, grounding. "You know you can trust me, right?" she asked softly, and the question felt like a knife wrapped in velvet. I nodded, because nodding kept her comfortable. That night, while she slept, I went deeper. I checked my credit history thoroughly. I reviewed every recent transaction. There were small transfers I hadn't paid attention to before, amounts subtle enough not to trigger alarms, but consistent enough to form a pattern. It wasn't a reckless theft. It was methodical. And suddenly Daniel made sense. Daniel wasn't a lover. Daniel was misdirection. If I felt threatened by another man, I would focus on competing emotionally instead of auditing accounts. If I suspected Maya, I would distance myself from the one person who might compare timelines with me. The jealousy wasn't collateral damage. It was the smokescreen. The realization didn't explode inside me. It settled, slow and heavy. I wasn't dealing with a cheating girlfriend. I was dealing with someone who had constructed an entire emotional narrative to keep me disoriented while she positioned herself financially. I lay beside her in the dark, staring at the ceiling while her breathing remained steady and peaceful. My heart wasn't racing anymore. The panic had burned off and left something clearer behind. She thought I was distracted. She thought I was insecure. She thought I was close to ending things on my own. For the first time since this began, I understood the board. And now that I understood the board, I could play. Once I understood what she was doing, I stopped reacting and started coordinating. The first person I needed fully on my side was Maya, because if this entire situation had been designed to fracture that friendship, then restoring it quietly was the first crack in her foundation. I asked Maya to meet again, this time somewhere more private, and when she sat across from me, I didn't soften anything. I laid it out calmly, explaining the loan, the altered recovery email, the small transfers, and the staged messages that had nearly convinced me she had betrayed me. Maya went pale as I spoke, not defensive, not offended, just horrified. She asked me months ago to help her test you, she admitted, her voice shaking. She said you had a history of cheating and she needed to see how loyal you really were. I told her I wasn't getting involved in something like that, and after that things between us got weird. I thought she was just being distant. The pieces slid together with sick precision. When Maya refused to participate, she didn't abandon the plan. She escalated it. She accessed Maya's account, manufactured conversations, and turned us against each other without either of us realizing it. We didn't explode with anger in that cafe. We didn't cause a scene. We did something quieter and far more dangerous. We agreed to play along. From that point on, I acted exactly how she expected me to act. I let small hints of insecurity resurface in controlled doses. I asked subtle questions about Maya, not accusatory, just enough to imply doubt. I stopped bringing up Daniel entirely. When she mentioned him, I waved it off casually, as if I had finally accepted he was harmless. The relief in her posture was subtle but undeniable. Maya did her part too. She replied to a few messages in a tone that seemed guilty but not defensive. She allowed just enough ambiguity to keep the illusion alive. We never discussed details over text. Everything important was handled in person because now we both understood how easily digital conversations could be weaponized. The shift in my girlfriend's behavior was almost immediate once she believed I was drifting. She became more attentive in ways that felt strategic rather than affectionate. She initiated intimacy more often, pulling me close with urgency, whispering that she hated tension between us, that she couldn't stand the thought of losing me. The physical chemistry was still there, intense and familiar, but now I could see the layers beneath it. The timing, the reassurance tied to moments when she sensed I was uncertain. One night, after we had been tangled up in bed and the room had gone quiet, she traced her fingers across my chest and said softly, "I feel like you're pulling away from me lately, and I don't know if it's Daniel or Maya or something else, but if you're thinking about ending this, I'd rather you just be honest." There it was, the nudge, the invitation for me to be the one to end it. I brushed my hand through her hair and sighed as if conflicted. "I just need time to think," I said carefully. "Things feel complicated." She pressed her forehead against mine, her voice gentle but deliberate. "If you decide this isn't working, I'll respect that. I just don't want you resenting me." Resenting her. The framing was flawless. The next step was financial. I contacted my bank quietly and asked about account monitoring. I didn't freeze anything yet because I needed proof of intent, not just suspicion. I also consulted a lawyer under the guise of reviewing general financial security, explaining the situation hypothetically. He didn't seem surprised by the pattern. "If someone believes a relationship is ending, they often accelerate whatever plans they have," he said calmly. "Watch for urgency." So I gave her urgency. I told her a few days later that I had been thinking about moving out temporarily to clear my head. I made sure to sound uncertain but serious. Her reaction was perfectly measured. She didn't panic. She didn't beg. She nodded slowly and said, "If that's what you need, I won't stop you." But that same night, I noticed her on her laptop longer than usual, the screen angled away from me. 2 days later, I received a notification from my bank that a large transfer had been initiated from my savings account to the joint investment account listed in the loan documents. The amount wasn't all of it, but it was enough to matter, enough to test whether the door was still open. I didn't block it immediately. I let it process far enough to be logged. Then I contacted the bank and reported the transaction as unauthorized. They froze the movement mid-process and began documenting everything. The representative asked if I suspected identity misuse, and I answered carefully, I suspect someone has access to information they shouldn't. When I came home that evening, she was on the couch scrolling through her phone, looking relaxed. She smiled when she saw me, stood up, and wrapped her arms around my waist. I was thinking maybe we could have a quiet night in, she murmured, her lips brushing my jaw. I hugged her back, steady and controlled. She thought I was about to walk away confused and heartbroken. She had no idea I had just tightened the net. By the time the bank flagged the transfer, everything was already in motion behind the scenes. I had met with the lawyer twice, quietly gathered login records, IP traces, timestamp comparisons, and copies of the loan documents that carried my forged signature. Nothing explosive, nothing dramatic, just clean documentation stacked neatly in a folder that sat locked in my desk drawer like a silent verdict waiting to be read. But the real trap required performance. Maya came over one evening under the pretense of clearing the air. My girlfriend suggested it herself, which almost impressed me. We can't keep dancing around this tension, she said earlier that day, her tone calm but calculated. If there's weirdness between you and Maya, let's address it like adults. The irony of that sentence was almost elegant. When Maya arrived, she looked nervous but composed. We sat at the kitchen table, the three of us arranged like a mediation session. I let the silence stretch slightly before speaking. I feel like there's been something off between us, I said carefully, glancing at Maya. And I don't want to carry suspicions anymore. Maya swallowed and nodded. I think there's been misunderstanding, she replied, her voice steady, but carrying just enough guilt to be believable. I might have blurred lines emotionally without realizing it, and I'm sorry if that created confusion. My girlfriend watched us both closely, her eyes sharp behind the softness of her expression. Blurred lines how? She asked gently. Maya exhaled. I had feelings at one point, she admitted, lowering her gaze. Nothing happened, but I didn't shut it down fast enough in my own head. The room went still. I could feel my girlfriend studying my reaction, waiting for anger, for heartbreak, for the moment I would implode and storm out, proving her narrative correct. Instead, I leaned back slowly and ran a hand through my hair. Thank you for being honest, I said, keeping my tone calm. I appreciate that. The flicker of confusion in my girlfriend's eyes was subtle but unmistakable. You're not upset? She asked. I'm not happy, I replied evenly, but I'm also not blind to how emotions work. What matters is what actually happened. Maya nodded, playing her part perfectly. Nothing happened. That conversation did two things at once. It reinforced the illusion that there had been emotional tension, and it positioned me as reflective rather than reactive, exactly what she needed to believe I was capable of walking away peacefully. 2 days later, she initiated another conversation in bed, her fingers tracing slow circles across my chest in the dark. If you decide to leave, she whispered, her voice low and almost vulnerable, I don't want it to be messy. I don't want lawyers and drama. We can handle this maturely. Lawyers. The word landed like confirmation. I shifted slightly and said, I don't want drama either. The next morning, the second attempt happened. Another transfer request, larger this time. Not reckless, but accelerated. The urgency my lawyer predicted had arrived right on schedule, because from her perspective, I was emotionally drifting and possibly about to end things. If she was going to secure what she needed, it had to happen now. The bank froze it immediately this time, and the fraud department contacted me directly. I provided every piece of documentation I had prepared. They confirmed the recovery email change, the device access, the forged authorization trail. Everything was now formally recorded. That evening I came home to find her cooking dinner, humming softly, the apartment warm and inviting. She looked up and smiled like nothing was unraveling behind her back. "I was thinking maybe we could talk tonight," she said casually, "about what you're feeling." I stepped closer, wrapped my arms around her waist and kissed her slowly. She responded instantly, leaning into me, her hands gripping my shirt as if anchoring herself. The chemistry was still there, undeniable and complicated, but now it felt like part of a chess match rather than something organic. "We'll talk," I murmured against her lips. "I promise." She didn't know the bank had already classified the transaction as attempted identity misuse. She didn't know the loan company had been notified. She didn't know Maya and I had copies of every manipulated message thread stored securely. She thought the narrative was still under her control. And that was the trap. Because when someone believes they are one move away from winning, they stop checking the board. All I had to do now was wait for the right moment to flip it. Just when I thought I had mapped out the entire strategy, Maya told me something that shifted the ground again. We were sitting in her car outside my building, engine off, the tension between us quieter now but heavier in a different way. We had already coordinated the evidence, already watched the bank freeze the second transfer, already prepared for the confrontation that was coming. I thought we were aligned on everything. "I need to tell you something before this ends," Maya said, gripping the steering wheel even though we weren't moving. "And I didn't say it earlier because I didn't want you to spiral before we had proof." I felt my chest tighten slightly. "What is it?" She exhaled slowly. "She approached me months ago, before any of this digital manipulation started. She asked me to help her test you." I stared at her. "Test me how?" "She said you had cheated in past relationships," Maya continued carefully. "She told me you were charming but unreliable, and she needed to know if you'd cross a line if given the opportunity. She wanted me to flirt with you subtly and see how you reacted." For a moment, I genuinely couldn't process it. The idea that she had constructed a loyalty experiment behind my back felt surreal, almost clinical. "I refused," Maya said firmly. "I told her that if she didn't trust you, she shouldn't be with you. That's when things between us shifted. After that, she stopped asking me directly, and then the weird messages started appearing." The pattern deepened. She hadn't just fabricated an affair to isolate me. She had tried to manufacture evidence of disloyalty first. When that failed, she created it digitally. "Why would she go that far?" I asked, more to myself than to Maya. Maya hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. "Because this isn't the first time," she said quietly. She showed me a thread from an online forum she had stumbled across while trying to understand the account breaches. A woman describing an eerily similar pattern. A partner who introduced fictional coworkers to create jealousy. Manufactured flirtation from friends. Financial entanglements that ended in sudden withdrawals and blame shifted onto the victim. The names were different. The tactics were not. I felt something inside me settle into place, not explosively, but with a kind of cold clarity. This wasn't impulsive behavior. This was a rehearsed method. Emotional destabilization, isolation, financial access, exit. "I think she's done this before," Maya said softly. "Maybe not exactly the same way, but close enough." The humiliation I had felt at the beginning of all this transformed into something steadier. I wasn't just a boyfriend who had been manipulated. I was a target in a pattern. When I went home that night, she was sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone, completely at ease. She smiled when she saw me, patted the cushion beside her, and said, "I was thinking maybe we could finally have that talk tonight." I sat down next to her, studying her face in a way I hadn't allowed myself to before. The confidence, the subtle watchfulness, the way she measured my reactions. "You ever feel like you're being tested?" I asked casually. She laughed lightly. "In what way?" "Like someone's waiting to see if you'll mess up," I continued, keeping my tone thoughtful rather than accusatory. She shrugged. "Trust is complicated. Sometimes you have to create situations to understand someone." There it was. Not a confession, but close. I leaned back and nodded slowly. And what happens if the person doesn't mess up? Her smile flickered for just a second. Then you adapt. Adapt. The word echoed in my head long after the conversation drifted elsewhere. She thought I was adapting emotionally. She had no idea I was adapting strategically. That night, while she slept beside me, I didn't feel rage anymore. I didn't even feel heartbreak. I felt something far more controlled. I wasn't her first attempt, but I was going to be the first one who didn't leave confused and financially drained. And that realization made the final confrontation less about revenge and more about ending a pattern. I didn't wait for another transfer attempt. I chose the night. I told her earlier that day that I wanted to cook dinner together, something simple, something normal, and she seemed almost relieved by the suggestion. When she walked into the apartment that evening, she kissed me like nothing was fractured between us, like the past few months had just been turbulence we were finally smoothing out. If I hadn't known what I knew, I might have believed it. Maya was already there. She was sitting at the dining table with a folder in front of her, calm but steady, not angry, not dramatic. My girlfriend stopped mid-step when she saw her, confusion flickering across her face before she masked it with a polite smile. "I thought this was just us," she said carefully. "It is," I replied, pulling out a chair. "Us. All of us." She looked between us, reading the room, sensing something had shifted. "What's going on?" I sat down slowly and slid a stack of printed documents across the table toward her. Bank statements, login records, IP address confirmations, the loan agreement with my forged signature highlighted in yellow. "You told me I didn't need to worry about him," I said evenly, meeting her eyes. "And you were right. Daniel was never the problem." Her expression didn't collapse immediately. She scanned the papers, flipping through them with controlled movements, her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "I don't know what you think this is," she began calmly, "but if you're accusing me of something, you need to be very careful." "I've been careful," I replied. "Careful enough to notice that Daniel doesn't exist. Careful enough to notice Maya's account being accessed from your devices. Careful enough to catch 2 unauthorized transfers before they cleared." Her composure cracked slightly at that. "That's ridiculous," she said, but the sharpness in her voice betrayed her. Maya leaned forward then, her tone steady but firm. "You asked me to test him. When I refused, you used my account anyway." Silence filled the room like pressure. My girlfriend's eyes flicked to Maya, calculating. "You're twisting things," she said. "I was trying to protect myself. He has a history of—" "No," I interrupted, my voice calm but unyielding. "You were isolating me. You tried to manufacture jealousy so I would doubt her. You altered my recovery email. You applied for a loan in my name. You accelerated the transfers when you thought I was about to leave." She stood up abruptly, pacing once as if anger could overpower documentation. "You're insane if you think I'd risk fraud over some petty relationship drama." "It's not petty," I said quietly. "It's patterned." I slid another sheet across the table, printed screenshots from online posts describing tactics eerily similar to hers. Different names, same structure. For the first time, she looked genuinely shaken. "You went digging into my past?" she demanded. "I went digging into mine," I replied. "And I realized I wasn't the first one you tried this with." The room felt smaller now, the air heavier. "I never took anything," she said, her voice dropping into something almost pleading. "Nothing actually went through." "Because I froze it," I answered evenly. "The bank has flagged the attempts. The lender has been notified. I have legal counsel reviewing everything." That was the moment she understood the board had flipped. The confidence drained from her posture, replaced not with remorse but with cold anger. "So what now?" she asked. "You're going to ruin my life?" I considered the question carefully. "I'm not ruining anything," I said. "I'm documenting it." She stared at me for a long time, searching for weakness, for hesitation, for the version of me who would doubt himself first. She didn't find him. Eventually she grabbed her coat without another word. At the door she paused, looking back at me with a mix of fury and disbelief. "You really think you won?" she asked quietly. I didn't raise my voice. This was never about winning. It was about not losing. She left. The door closed. And for the first time in months, the apartment felt quiet in a way that wasn't tense. The legal process moved forward slowly after that. The loan was voided under investigation. The fraud report stayed on file. She sent a few messages at first, alternating between anger and attempted reconciliation, but I didn't respond. Eventually, the silence stretched long enough that she stopped trying. Maya and I didn't celebrate. There was no dramatic victory lap. There was just a slow rebuilding of something that had been deliberately strained. We talked openly, compared notes, acknowledged how close we had come to turning on each other over a narrative that had been engineered. Some nights I still replay it. The kitchen argument. Her telling me I didn't need to worry about him. Me telling her she didn't need to worry about Maya. The symmetry of it. The balance that felt mature at the time. He said I didn't need to worry about him. He was right. I never did. I just needed to worry about the person standing in front of me.